Hi, I'm Vanessa Palmer, and for 8 years my sister told everyone I was wasting my life. She called my work hobby art, dismissed my clients as charity cases, and made sure every family dinner included at least one comment about how I should get a real job. What she didn't know was that the empire she built her reputation on, the career she lorded over me at every opportunity, started with something she stole from me. And the man who signed her paychecks. He was about to make sure everyone knew it. Have you ever watched someone take credit for your work and then mock you for not being successful enough? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when I walked into the Copper Leaf Bistro and saw my entire family celebrating without me. Again. I'd only stopped by because my usual coffee shop was closed for renovations, and this place happened to be 2 blocks from my studio apartment in the Hawthorne District. The moment I pushed through the brass-trimmed door, I heard the laughter. Loud, confident, the kind that fills a room and demands attention. I recognized it immediately. Diane's laugh had always carried that particular quality, like she was performing for an invisible audience that existed solely to admire her. They were seated near the window, the best table in the house with the view of the maple trees lining the street. Mom wore her pearl earrings, the ones she saved for special occasions. Dad had on a tie, which he never did unless something mattered. And Diane sat at the head of the table in a cream blazer that probably cost more than my rent, holding court like she always did. A small cake sat in the center with gold lettering I couldn't quite make out from where I stood. I didn't walk over. I didn't wave. I ordered my coffee to go, paid quickly, and left before anyone turned their head. But as I pushed back through that door into the cool autumn air, I felt the familiar ache settle in my chest. Not surprise. Not even hurt anymore. Just a dull, persistent reminder that I had become optional. Back at my apartment, I sat at my desk surrounded by half-finished illustrations for a children's book about a turtle who wanted to fly. The publisher was small, the advance was modest, and the deadline was tight. But I loved the work. I loved the quiet concentration it required, the way colors bled into each other on watercolor paper, the satisfaction of bringing something to life that hadn't existed before. My sister called it finger painting. My mother called it sweet. My father didn't call it anything at all. I opened my laptop to check email and found 3 new messages. 2 were from clients, both nonprofits asking if I could lower my rates. The third was from someone named Kenneth Bradshaw. The subject line read inquiry regarding Cascade campaign original concept work. I stared at it for a long moment before clicking. Ms. Palmer, my name is Kenneth Bradshaw and I'm the founder of Pinnacle Creative Group here in Portland. I'm reaching out because we're currently conducting an internal audit of our archives and campaign origins. Your name appeared in connection with materials from 2016. Specifically, the Cascade Wildlife Initiative pitch deck. I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you at your earliest convenience. This is not a legal matter, but rather a clarification of attribution. Please let me know your availability. I read it twice. Then a third time. Cascade Wildlife Initiative. I hadn't heard that name in years. My hands felt cold as I scrolled back through old files on my external hard drive, the one I kept meaning to organize but never did. It took me 20 minutes to find the folder buried under layers of outdated proposals and freelance projects I'd long forgotten. But there it was. Cascade Wildlife Initiative, full branding proposal, January 2016. I opened the first file. My design stared back at me. The logo I'd spent weeks perfecting, a stylized heron mid-flight with wings that doubled as pine branches. The color palette, all mossy greens and slate blues meant to evoke the Pacific Northwest without feeling cliché. The tagline, preserve the flight path, protect the future. Every single element had been mine. I'd created it during the winter I was still trying to break into the industry, back when I took on anything that might build my portfolio. The client had been a small environmental nonprofit run by a woman named Claire something. I couldn't even remember her last name. She'd paid me $800, thanked me profusely, and that had been the end of it. Or so I thought. I pulled up a browser and searched Cascade Wildlife Initiative. The first result was a major conservation campaign that had run nationally 3 years ago. I clicked through to the case studies. Pinnacle Creative Group was listed as the agency behind it. And the lead strategist credited with the concept and branding? Diane Palmer, Senior Marketing Director. I sat very still. My screen glowed in the dimming light of my apartment. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and then stopped. I could hear my upstairs neighbor walking across their floor, the rhythmic creak of old hardwood. But inside my head, everything had gone silent. I searched my email archives next. It took digging, but I finally found the thread from January 2016. Claire Hutchins, that was her name. Executive director of a scrappy little nonprofit that had big dreams and almost no budget. She'd been warm and enthusiastic in every message. And then in March of that year, she'd sent one final email. Vanessa, thank you again for all your beautiful work. Unfortunately, our board has decided to go in a different direction and we won't be moving forward with the campaign at this time. I've attached your final payment. Wishing you all the best. I'd been disappointed but not devastated. That was the freelance life. Projects fell through. Clients changed their minds. You moved on. Except now I was wondering if they'd actually changed their minds or if the project had simply changed hands. I looked at the date on that email. March 14th. Then I pulled up LinkedIn and searched for my sister's profile. According to her work history, she'd joined Pinnacle Creative Group in April 2016. The next morning I called the number in Kenneth Bradshaw's email. A receptionist with a pleasant voice answered and transferred me without hesitation. He picked up on the second ring. This is Bradshaw. His voice was deep, measured, the kind that suggested he didn't waste words. Mr. Bradshaw, this is Vanessa Palmer. I'm returning your email about the Cascade campaign. There was a brief pause. Ms. Palmer, thank you for calling. I appreciate you getting back to me so quickly. I'd like to meet in person if possible. Would you be available this afternoon? I told him I would be. He suggested a coffee shop in the Pearl District, neutral territory he called it, and gave me a time. I hung up feeling strangely calm. Not nervous. Not angry. Just ready. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively modern places with concrete floors and Edison bulbs hanging from exposed beams. Kenneth Bradshaw was already seated when I arrived, a man in his early 60s with steel gray hair and a navy suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for him. He stood when he saw me and extended his hand. Vanessa, thank you for meeting me. Please, sit. I sat. He ordered us both coffee without asking what I wanted, which should have annoyed me but somehow didn't. When the cups arrived, he slid a thin folder across the table. I'll be direct because I think you deserve that, he said. 3 weeks ago, one of our junior designers was reorganizing our digital archives and found files that didn't match our internal naming conventions. They were older, dated before Pinnacle acquired them, and they had metadata attached. Your name, your email, timestamps from early 2016. He paused, watching my face. The designs in those files are identical to the Cascade Wildlife campaign we executed in 2021. The campaign your sister is credited with creating. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts. My original logo. My color studies. My tagline. And beneath them, documents showing Pinnacle's version. They were the same. Not similar. Not inspired by. Identical. I created those designs for a nonprofit client in January 2016, I said quietly. They told me the project was cancelled. He nodded slowly. The nonprofit was real. Claire Hutchins ran it. But according to the records I've been able to access, she had a sister who worked in development consulting. That sister had connections at Pinnacle. He tapped the folder. Your designs were submitted to us by Diane Palmer as part of her application portfolio. She claimed they were spec work she'd created independently to demonstrate her strategic thinking. The coffee shop sound seemed to fade. I could see his lips moving, but it took a moment for the words to fully land. She used my work to get the job. Yes. And then when the opportunity came to pitch a conservation campaign 5 years later, she recycled the same concepts. He leaned back in his chair. Ms. Palmer, I need to be clear about something. This puts my company in a complicated position. If this work was stolen, if attribution was falsified, that's a serious ethical breach. But more than that, it reflects poorly on our vetting process. I swallowed. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you have documentation. Contracts, original files with timestamps, correspondence. Anything that proves you created this work before Diane submitted it to us. I nodded. I have all of it. Then I think we need to have a conversation about what happens next, he said. And I think your sister needs to be part of that conversation. I left the coffee shop with a follow-up meeting scheduled for the following week. Kenneth Bradshaw had been clear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He wanted to handle this internally first, give Diane a chance to explain, and determine the full scope of what had happened. He'd also been clear about something else. If the evidence was as definitive as he suspected, there would be consequences. I didn't ask what kind. I just thanked him and walked back to my car. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the family dinners where Diane had talked about her big campaigns, her creative breakthroughs, her industry recognition. I thought about the time she'd brought home an award, a sleek glass rectangle engraved with her name and the Cascade Wildlife Initiative listed beneath it. Mom had cried. Dad had taken pictures. And I had sat at the end of the table eating mashed potatoes, nodding along while my sister accepted praise for work I'd created in a cramped apartment with a space heater running because I couldn't afford to turn up the heat. I pulled out my old sketchbooks, the ones I'd kept from those early years. Page after page of concepts and studies and half-formed ideas. I found the original Heron sketches, rougher than the final version but unmistakably the same DNA. I took photos of every page with my phone. Then I went through my email archives again and downloaded everything related to Claire Hutchins and the original project. File names, timestamps, payment records. I saved it all to a new folder and backed it up in 3 different places. By the time the sun came up, I had built a timeline. Every piece of communication, every file, every payment, all arranged in chronological order. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because for the first time in 8 years, someone with authority was asking me to prove my worth. And I was going to make sure there was no room for doubt. The following Tuesday, I received an email from Kenneth Bradshaw's assistant requesting my presence at Pinnacle Creative Group's main office. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Attendees listed included myself, Mr. Bradshaw, Diane Palmer, and someone named Rita Caldwell who was identified as Director of Human Resources. I read the email 3 times, my coffee going cold on the desk beside me. This was happening. This was actually happening. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Not just organizing documents, though I did plenty of that. I printed everything. The original contract with Claire Hutchins. Email threads showing the project scope and my deliverables. Bank statements proving payment. Digital files with metadata showing creation dates. I even tracked down Claire Hutchins herself through LinkedIn and sent her a carefully worded message explaining the situation. She responded within hours, horrified and apologetic. She'd had no idea the designs had been passed along. Her sister, the one with connections at Pinnacle, had asked to see the work as a reference for something else entirely. Or so she'd claimed. Claire offered to provide a written statement. I thanked her and added it to my growing file. Thursday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine. Portland in November could go either way, but today the sky was clear and bright. I chose my clothes carefully. Not my usual jeans and paint-stained cardigan, but a navy dress I'd bought for a friend's wedding 2 years ago and hardly worn since. Simple, professional, nothing that could be dismissed as trying too hard or not trying enough. I pulled my hair back, applied minimal makeup, and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back seemed steadier than I felt. Riverside Corporate Tower stood near the waterfront, all glass and steel catching the afternoon light. I'd passed it hundreds of times but never been inside. The lobby was exactly what you'd expect from a building that housed companies with names like Pinnacle. Polished marble floors, modern art installations, a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of granite. I gave my name to the receptionist, who smiled warmly and directed me to the elevators. 14th floor. The elevator doors opened into a space that managed to feel both expansive and intimate. Exposed brick walls, probably original to whatever warehouse had stood here before the renovation. Sleek conference rooms with glass walls. Employees moving purposefully between desks, most of them younger than me, all of them looking like they belonged. I was met by a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Vanessa, I'm Rita Caldwell. Thank you for coming in today. I know this situation is unusual." She led me down a hallway to a corner conference room. Inside, Kenneth Bradshaw sat at the head of a long table. Diane was already seated, her back straight, hands folded in front of her. She looked up when I entered. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Not quite fear. More like recognition that the game had shifted. "Vanessa," she said evenly. "I wasn't expecting you." I didn't respond. I took the seat Rita indicated, directly across from my sister, and set my folder on the table. Kenneth cleared his throat. "Thank you both for being here. I want to start by saying this meeting is meant to clarify some questions that have come up regarding the Cascade Wildlife Initiative campaign. Diane, you've been with Pinnacle for 8 years and your work has been exemplary. That's not in question. What is in question is the origin of certain creative materials." He opened his own folder and slid a sheet across to Diane. "This is the logo you submitted as part of your application portfolio in 2016. You stated it was original spec work created to demonstrate your approach to conservation branding." Diane glanced at the paper. "That's correct. It was a concept I developed independently." Kenneth nodded slowly. Then he slid another sheet across the table. "This is a file we found in our archives 3 weeks ago. Same logo. Same color palette. Same tagline. But the metadata shows it was created in January 2016 by someone named Vanessa Palmer." He paused. "Your sister." The room went very quiet. I could hear the ventilation system, a soft mechanical hum. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. Diane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't know what that file is or how it ended up in your system, but my work was original. I spent weeks on that concept." Kenneth leaned forward slightly. "Then you won't mind if we review some additional documentation." He gestured to me. "Vanessa has brought materials that may help clarify the timeline." I opened my folder. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected them to shake. One by one, I laid out the papers. The contract with Claire Hutchins, dated January 5, 2016. The project brief outlining the scope of work. Email correspondence showing my revisions and Claire's feedback. The final invoice and payment confirmation dated February 23. And finally, the email from Claire stating the project had been cancelled, sent March 14. "I created these designs for a non-profit client at the beginning of 2016, I said quietly. I was paid for the work and told the campaign wasn't moving forward. I had no reason to believe otherwise until Mr. Bradshaw contacted me last week." I slid one more document across the table. This is a statement from Claire Hutchins explaining that her sister, who had connections in the marketing industry, asked to see examples of conservation campaign materials. Claire provided my designs as a reference. She had no knowledge they would be submitted elsewhere. Diane's expression had gone very still. "That's circumstantial. Lots of designers work on similar concepts. It's entirely possible we developed comparable ideas independently." Rita Caldwell, who had been silent until now, spoke up. She had her own folder open, and I could see printed screenshots. Diane, these aren't comparable ideas. They're identical. The heron illustration, the specific curve of the wing, the way the feathers transition into pine needles, even the kerning on the tagline. She turned her laptop around to show a side-by-side comparison. We had a forensic analyst examine both files. The design elements match at a pixel level. Kenneth's voice remained even, almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. Diane, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you submit Vanessa's work as your own in your application to Pinnacle? My sister's face had lost some of its color. She looked at me for the first time since the meeting began, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger. Not defiance. Something closer to calculation, like she was running through options in her head and discarding each one. I needed the job, she said finally. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I'd been out of work for 6 months. I had bills. I had loans. And yes, I saw Vanessa's designs and I thought they were good. Better than anything I'd been able to come up with on my own. So I used them. I told myself it was just to get my foot in the door, that once I was working I'd prove myself with original ideas. And I did. Everything else I've created here has been mine. But the campaign that won you the Stratton Award last year, Kenneth said. The one that brought in 3 major clients and elevated your position to senior director. That was built on the cascade concept. You recycled the original pitch almost verbatim. Diane opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands had moved from the table to her lap. I started that campaign before I realized how much attention it would get. By the time it took off, I couldn't exactly admit the foundation wasn't mine. It would have destroyed everything. Rita made a note on the pad in front of her. The silence stretched. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slowly. Kenneth folded his hands on top of his folder. Diane, effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave while we conduct a full review of your work history here. We need to determine if there are other instances of misattributed materials. The Stratton Award will need to be returned, and we'll be issuing a formal correction to the industry publications that covered the Cascade campaign. He paused. I want to be clear. This isn't punitive. This is procedural. But the outcome will likely result in termination. Diane's face had gone pale. You're firing me. We're following protocol, Rita said gently but firmly. Intellectual property theft is grounds for immediate dismissal under your employment contract. You'll receive severance as outlined in your agreement, but your access to company resources will be revoked today. My sister stood abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor. She looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. Not hatred, though maybe that would come later. More like disbelief. You did this. You actually did this. I met her eyes. I didn't do anything except tell the truth. You're the one who made the choice 8 years ago. She grabbed her bag and walked out without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The 3 of us sat in the remaining quiet for a moment. Then Kenneth turned to me. Ms. Palmer, I want to apologize on behalf of Pinnacle. This should never have happened. Our vetting process failed, and as a result, you were deprived of recognition and likely financial opportunities for work you created. I'm not sure how to make that right, but I'd like to try. He slid a business card across the table. This is our contracts department. I'd like to discuss bringing you on for a project, properly credited and compensated this time. And if you're open to it, I'd like to explore a more formal relationship. We could use someone with your perspective. I picked up the card, feeling the weight of it between my fingers. Thank you. I'll think about it. Rita walked me back to the elevator. As we waited for the doors to open, she turned to me. For what it's worth, what you did today took courage. A lot of people would have let it go. I smiled faintly. I let it go for 8 years. I didn't have any left in me. The elevator descended smoothly. When I stepped back out into the lobby, the sunlight streaming through the glass felt different. Brighter maybe. Or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time in a long time. I walked to my car, set my folder on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Your sister just called very upset." "What happened? Can you explain?" I stared at the message. Then I turned my phone face down and started the engine. I wasn't ready to explain. Not to her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some things didn't require my defense or my justification. They simply were. And for once, that was enough. Over the next few days, I waited for the fallout. I expected angry calls, accusations, maybe even my parents showing up at my door demanding I fix what I'd broken. But none of that came. Instead, there was silence. My phone stayed quiet. My email remained free of family drama. It was almost eerie, like the moment after a storm when you're not sure if it's really over or just gathering strength. On Saturday, I met with a lawyer. Not because I thought I needed one, but because Rita Caldwell had gently suggested it might be wise to have someone review any agreements before I signed them. The lawyer, a woman named Alice Verne who worked out of a small office near Powell's Books, listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You have a strong case if you wanted to pursue damages. Not just from your sister, but potentially from Pinnacle for the years they profited from your work." I shook my head. "I don't want to sue anyone. I just want to move forward." She nodded. "Then let's make sure whatever they offer you is fair. And let's get everything in writing." The following week, I received a formal offer from Pinnacle. They wanted me to redesign their internal branding for a new sustainability initiative they were launching. The compensation was more than I'd made in the past 6 months combined. But more than that, the contract included a clause explicitly stating that all creative work would be credited to me, that I would retain rights to my original concepts, and that any derivative work would require my written approval. Alice reviewed it, made a few minor adjustments, and told me it was as good as these things got. I signed it on a Tuesday afternoon at the same coffee shop where Kenneth Bradshaw had first shown me the stolen designs. This time, I ordered something celebratory. A ridiculous caramel latte with extra whipped cream that I never would have justified spending money on before. It tasted like victory, sweet and probably too much, but earned. That evening, my phone finally rang. "Mom." I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message while standing in my kitchen. "Vanessa, we need to talk about what happened with your sister. She's devastated. She's lost her job, her reputation. I know you two have had your differences, but this feels extreme. Please call me back. We need to work this out as a family." I deleted the message. Then I blocked the number. Not out of spite, but out of preservation. I'd spent years trying to work things out, trying to be patient and understanding, trying to believe that eventually my family would see me. They hadn't. And Diane's consequences weren't my responsibility to fix. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected email. It was from Claire Hutchins, the nonprofit director I'd worked with back in 2016. She'd heard about what happened through the industry grapevine, which apparently moved faster than I'd realized. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in working with her again. The organization had received a significant grant and they were finally ready to launch the conservation campaign they dreamed about all those years ago. She wanted to use my original designs, the ones I'd created before everything got complicated, and she wanted to pay me properly this time. I said yes. Not because I needed the work, though it didn't hurt. But because there was something poetic about it. The project that had been stolen and reshaped and used against me was coming back to its source. And this time, it would go out into the world with my name attached, exactly as it should have from the beginning. The first family event I was invited to after everything happened was Thanksgiving. The invitation came from my father via text. "Your mother wants you to come." It would mean a lot to her. No mention of what it would mean to him. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just an expectation that I would show up and pretend everything was fine because that's what we'd always done. I didn't respond. Instead, I spent Thanksgiving with Rita Caldwell, who had become something unexpected over the past month. Not quite a friend, not quite a mentor, but someone who saw me clearly and didn't ask me to shrink. She'd invited me to her home in Laurelhurst, a beautiful old craftsman filled with art and books and the smell of roasting vegetables. Her wife was a professor at Reed College, funny and warm and entirely uninterested in corporate drama. We ate good food, drank better wine, and talked about things that had nothing to do with family or stolen designs or years of being overlooked. At one point, Rita raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. "And to people brave enough to claim what's theirs." I clinked my glass against hers and felt something settle in my chest. Not closure exactly. More like space. Room to breathe without the weight of other people's expectations pressing down. December came with rain and early darkness. I worked on the Pinnacle project from my apartment, which suddenly felt less like a place I was stuck and more like a place I'd chosen. The nonprofit campaign moved forward with Claire sending enthusiastic updates every few days. And slowly, quietly, my portfolio began to reflect the truth. My name appeared in industry newsletters. A design blog featured my work on the conservation initiative. Someone from a gallery in the Alberta Arts District reached out about a show. I didn't hear from Diane until 2 days before Christmas. She sent an email, not a call. No subject line. Just a message that appeared in my inbox late at night when I was finishing up some sketches. "I've been thinking about what I'd say to you if I had the chance. I'm not going to apologize because I don't think you'd believe me anyway. But I need you to know that I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I was desperate and you made it look so easy. You've always made it look easy. The art, the creativity, the way people liked you without you having to try. I had to fight for everything. And when I saw your work, I convinced myself it didn't matter because you'd just make more. You always do. I know that doesn't make it right. I know I took something that wasn't mine. But I can't undo it now. So I guess this is just me saying I see what I did. And I'm sorry you had to fight me to make other people see it too." I read it twice. Then I closed the email without responding. Maybe one day I'd have something to say back. Maybe I'd find words that captured the complicated mess of anger and pity and exhausted relief I felt. But that day wasn't today. Today, I just wanted to keep moving forward. On Christmas Eve, I drove out to the coast. I'd been working non-stop for weeks and needed air that didn't smell like the city. The ocean in winter was cold and gray and honest. I walked along the beach at Cannon Beach, watching the waves crash against the rocks, feeling the wind pull at my coat. Families dotted the sand, kids running despite the cold, parents calling after them. I found a flat rock near the waterline and sat. My phone buzzed. A message from Kenneth Bradshaw. "Just wanted to let you know the sustainability campaign launches next month. Your designs are going to be seen by a lot of people. I hope you're ready for that. And I hope you're proud. You should be." I smiled and tucked the phone back in my pocket. The sun was starting to set, turning the sky shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible for December. I thought about the past 2 months. The discovery, the confrontation, the unraveling of a lie I hadn't even known existed. I thought about my sister sitting in whatever apartment she'd moved to after losing the life she'd built on stolen ground. I thought about my parents, probably setting the table for a Christmas dinner I wouldn't attend, maybe wondering where things went wrong or maybe not wondering at all. And then I stopped thinking about them. Because the truth was, this story wasn't really about them anymore. It was about the moment I'd decided I was worth fighting for. The moment I'd stopped waiting for someone else to see my value and started insisting on it myself. That moment in Kenneth Bradshaw's office when I laid out my evidence and didn't apologize for taking up space. That moment in the coffee shop when I signed a contract that recognized my work. That moment right now, sitting on cold sand watching the ocean refuse to be anything other than itself. I stayed until the light faded and the temperature dropped enough that my fingers went numb. Then I walked back to my car, cranked up the heat, and drove home through the dark. My apartment was small and cluttered with art supplies and probably always would be. But when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. January brought cold rain and a kind of clarity that only comes after you've stopped apologizing for existing. I woke up on the second day of the new year to an email from a marketing magazine I'd never heard of before. They wanted to interview me about the Cascade Wildlife Initiative and what they were calling a significant case of industry misconduct. Apparently word had spread faster than I'd anticipated. The story wasn't just about stolen designs anymore. It had become something larger, a conversation about credit and ethics and how many talented people disappeared into the shadows while others claimed their light. I agreed to the interview with one condition. I wanted to talk about the work itself, not just the theft. I wanted people to understand what goes into creating something from nothing, the hours of research and revision and self-doubt that nobody sees. The writer, a man named David Chen, met me at a cafe in the Hawthorne District. He ordered black coffee and pulled out a digital recorder with the kind of reverence that suggested he took his job seriously. "Tell me about the original commission," he said. "What was your process?" I described those early months of 2016. How I'd met with Claire Hutchins in her cramped nonprofit office that smelled like old carpet and instant coffee. How she'd shown me photos of herons nesting along the Columbia River, their wings spanning impossible widths, their grace making something in my chest tighten. How I'd spent a week just sketching, trying to capture not just what a heron looked like but what it meant. Freedom. Persistence. The fragile balance between survival and extinction. The design wasn't just a logo, I told David. It was a promise. A visual representation of what we were trying to protect. And when Claire told me the project was cancelled, I grieved it. Not because of the money, though I needed that too. But because I believed in what it could have been. David took notes, nodding occasionally. "And when you found out your sister had used it?" I considered the question carefully. I wasn't angry at first. I was confused. It felt like discovering someone had been wearing your clothes and you'd never noticed they were missing. But then the anger came later, when I realized it wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. She saw something I'd made and decided it would serve her better than it served me. The article came out 3 weeks later. The headline read, "When your family steals more than designs, how one artist reclaimed her voice." It was fair and thorough and deeply uncomfortable to read. David had interviewed Kenneth Bradshaw, Rita Caldwell, even Claire Hutchins. He'd also reached out to Diane, who had declined to comment. The piece ended with a quote from me that I barely remembered saying. "We teach people how to treat us. For years I taught my family that I could be erased. I'm done with that lesson now." The response was immediate and overwhelming. My email filled with messages from other designers sharing their own stories of stolen credit. Art directors who'd had juniors present their concepts as original work. Freelancers who'd watched clients take their ideas to bigger agencies. Students whose professors had published their thesis projects under different names. The common thread in every story was the same. They'd stayed quiet because speaking up felt dangerous. Because they needed the work or the reference or the relationship. Because they'd been told that making waves would only hurt their careers. I responded to as many as I could, usually late at night when my own work was done. I didn't have advice exactly, just solidarity. I told them what Rita had told me. That courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was deciding your integrity mattered more than your comfort. Some of them thanked me. Others just needed someone to witness their anger. I understood both. In early February, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a wooden box, plain but well made, with a small brass latch. I opened it at my kitchen table, half expecting something ominous. Instead I found a bronze compass, old and heavy, with coordinates engraved on the back that I didn't recognize. There was a note tucked beneath it in handwriting I knew immediately. My grandmother's. "Vanessa, if you're reading this, it means Rita found you. I asked her to hold on to this until you needed it. Not until you asked for it, but until you needed it. This compass belonged to your great-grandfather. He was a surveyor, spent his life marking boundaries and making sure people knew where they stood. I always thought you had that same quality. The ability to see clearly even when others wanted to blur the lines. Your sister, she's different. She needs to be seen. You need to be accurate. Neither is wrong, but only one builds something that lasts. I'm proud of you for holding your ground. Keep going straight. Love, Grandma Pearl. I sat holding the compass for a long time, running my thumb over the worn metal. My grandmother had died 4 years ago, back when I was still trying to make my family see me. She'd been the only one who never made me feel like my art was a phase I'd grow out of. The only one who asked about my projects like they mattered. I'd thought her faith in me had died with her. Apparently I'd been wrong. Rita called that evening. I wanted to make sure you got it. Your grandmother gave it to me about 6 months before she passed. She said you'd know when the time was right. I pressed the compass between my palms. Thank you for keeping it safe. There was a pause on the line. She knew, didn't she? About Diane? Rita's voice was careful. She suspected. She never said it outright, but there were comments over the years. Little things about how some people collect accomplishments and others create them. I think she was trying to prepare you without breaking your heart. After we hung up, I placed the compass on my desk next to my sketchbooks. It sat there like a sentinel, a reminder that someone had believed I'd find my way even when I couldn't see the path myself. March arrived with unexpected warmth. Portland shed its rain like an old coat and people emerged from their winter caves, pale and blinking. The nonprofit campaign launched with a small event at the Oregon Zoo. Claire had invited me as the guest of honor, which felt surreal and entirely too much attention. But I went anyway, wearing a green dress that felt appropriate for the occasion and the same bronze compass on a chain around my neck. The event space was outdoors, nestled between exhibits, with banners displaying my heron design larger than I'd ever seen it. People milled around drinking wine from plastic cups and eating tiny appetizers that were gone in 2 bites. Claire found me almost immediately and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and gratitude. I can't believe we're finally here, she said, her eyes bright. 7 years late but exactly right. A small crowd gathered for the speeches. Claire spoke about the mission, about the importance of protecting migratory paths, about how art and science could work together to change minds. Then she introduced me, and I had to walk to the front while people applauded, which made my face hot and my hands shake. I'm not good at speeches, I started, which got a small laugh. But I want to say that this design, this campaign, it represents something important to me. Not just because it's my work, but because it's work that almost disappeared. Work that got buried and reshaped and claimed by someone else. And for a long time, I let that happen because I didn't think I had the right to fight for it. I paused, looking out at the faces watching me. Some I knew. Most I didn't. But I believe we have to fight for the things we create. Not because we're precious or territorial, but because our work carries our voice. And when someone takes that without permission, they're not just stealing a design. They're silencing a perspective. So this campaign, it's not just about conservation. It's about refusing to be erased. The applause that followed felt different than the polite clapping from before. It felt like recognition. Afterward, several people came up to talk to me. Some were designers who'd read the article. Others were donors who wanted to support the nonprofit. One woman, probably in her 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes, handed me her card. I run a gallery in the Pearl District, she said. We focus on illustrators and emerging artists. I'd love to show your work if you're interested. Her name was Marion Voss and her card was simple, cream-colored with black text. I told her I'd think about it, which we both knew meant yes. By the time I left the zoo, the sun was setting and my feet hurt from standing in heels I wasn't used to wearing. But I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not satisfaction exactly. More like momentum. Like I was finally moving in a direction I'd chosen instead of reacting to circumstances someone else had created. April brought the gallery show. Marian had given me 2 months to prepare, which was both generous and terrifying. I'd never shown my work in a formal setting before. Freelance projects and digital portfolios were one thing. Prints on a wall with price tags and people judging them in person was something else entirely. I chose pieces that felt personal, illustrations from children's books I'd worked on, concept art for campaigns that never launched, sketches from my early days when I was still figuring out my style. The opening was on a Friday night. I arrived early to help Marian hang the last few pieces, my stomach in knots. She worked with practiced efficiency, adjusting frames and checking sight lines with the focus of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. "Stop worrying," she said without looking at me. "Your work is strong. People will respond to it. But what if they don't? Then they don't." She stepped back to examine a large print of a fox mid-leap, all rust-colored fur and concentration. "But I've been doing this for 30 years and I can tell when something has weight. Your work has weight." People started arriving around 7. I recognized a few faces from the nonprofit event. Rita came with her wife, both of them dressed like they'd come from somewhere important. Kenneth Bradshaw showed up briefly, shook my hand, said something encouraging I didn't quite hear over my own anxiety, and left. Claire brought half her nonprofit board. And then there were strangers, people I'd never seen before, walking slowly from piece to piece, leaning in to read the small placards Marian had created describing each work. I stood in the corner nursing a glass of wine and trying not to hover. An older man spent 10 minutes in front of my heron design, the original sketch I'd done before it became the Cascade campaign. He finally turned to Marian and said something I couldn't hear. She nodded, made a note on her tablet, and placed a small red dot next to the frame. "Sold." I blinked. Someone had bought my work. Actual money for something I'd created. Marian caught my eye from across the room and smiled. By the end of the night, 7 pieces had red dots. 7. I stood in the empty gallery after everyone left, looking at those dots like they were proof of something I'd always hoped but never quite believed. That my work mattered to people who didn't know me. That it could exist independently of my name or my story or my family's opinion. Marian handed me a glass of champagne she'd been saving. "To the first of many," she said. We clinked glasses and I let myself feel it. Not pride exactly, though that was part of it. More like validation. The quiet kind that settles in your bones and changes how you stand. May was consumed by new projects. Pinnacle had asked me to come on for another campaign, this one focused on urban green spaces. The nonprofit work continued to expand, with Claire connecting me to other organizations that needed branding. And Marian had scheduled a second show for the fall, which meant I needed to create an entire new body of work in 4 months. I was busier than I'd ever been, working late into the night most days, surviving on coffee and the kind of focused energy that comes from finally doing what you're meant to do. My parents reached out once during this time. A brief email from my father asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if we could talk. I read it 3 times trying to find an apology or acknowledgement that never came. Instead it was careful and distant, the tone you'd use with an acquaintance you'd wronged but didn't quite remember how. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty but because I didn't have the bandwidth to manage their discomfort on top of everything else. Diane's name came up occasionally in industry circles, usually in the context of the scandal. I heard through a contact that she'd moved to Seattle and was working in retail, something totally removed from marketing. Part of me felt sorry for her. The part that remembered us as kids, before everything got complicated, when we'd built forts out of couch cushions and believed we'd always be on the same side. But mostly I felt nothing. She'd made choices and now she was living with them. Just like I was living with mine. In June, I got a call from a publisher in New York. They'd seen my children's book illustrations and wanted to know if I'd be interested in a contract for a series. 3 books, full creative control, advance payment that made my hands shake when I read the number. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Then I called Rita, because she'd become the person I called when good things happened. "That's incredible," she said, her voice warm. "You know what this means, right?" What? It means you're not just recovering from what happened. You're thriving. And that's the best possible outcome. Not just justice, but joy. I hung up and sat in my apartment, looking around at the organized chaos of art supplies and reference books and half-drunk mugs of tea. This space that used to feel like a place I was stuck now felt like a launch pad. Everything I needed was here. Not because someone gave it to me or approved it, but because I'd built it myself, piece by piece, choice by choice, over years of being told it wasn't enough. July brought a heat wave that made Portland unbearable. I spent most of it indoors with fans running, working on the book illustrations and trying not to melt. But on one particularly sweltering afternoon, I forced myself outside for a walk. I needed to clear my head and the apartment felt too small for both me and my thoughts. I ended up near the waterfront, where people were sprawled on the grass trying to catch any hint of breeze coming off the river. Families with small children. Couples holding hands. Solo readers under trees. I found an empty bench and sat, watching the water move with the lazy determination of something that knew exactly where it was going. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. It was Diane. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to justify anything. I just wanted you to know that I've been in therapy, actually dealing with why I did what I did. And I'm learning that I spent my whole life competing with you for something you weren't even playing for. You were just being yourself and I made it a contest. That's on me. Anyway. I saw the article about your gallery show. Your work looked beautiful. It always was. I'm sorry I couldn't just say that when it mattered. I read it twice. Then I put my phone away and watched the river some more. Maybe one day I'd respond. Maybe I'd even mean it if I said I forgave her. But today wasn't that day. Today I just wanted to sit in the heat and feel grateful that I'd survived the fire. August arrived with smoke from distant wildfires turning the sky an eerie orange. The air quality warnings kept most people indoors, which suited me fine. I had deadlines approaching and the enforced isolation felt almost productive. My apartment became a cocoon of filtered air and focused work, sketches spreading across every available surface as I refined the illustrations for the book series. The publisher had sent detailed notes after reviewing my initial concepts. They loved the overall direction but wanted adjustments to two of the main characters. The notes were thoughtful, not demanding, which made me want to do the work well rather than resent the revision process. I'd heard stories about publishers who treated illustrators like interchangeable parts, but these people seemed to understand that collaboration didn't mean compromise. On a Thursday afternoon when the smoke had cleared enough to open windows, I received a certified letter. The return address was a law firm in downtown Portland I'd never heard of. My stomach tightened as I signed for it, already running through worst-case scenarios. Maybe Diane was suing me. Maybe my parents had decided to make this a legal battle after all. Maybe someone had found a technicality that would unravel everything I'd rebuilt. I opened it standing in my kitchen, too anxious to sit. Inside was a single-page letter on expensive letterhead. Ms. Palmer, we represent the estate of Pearl Elizabeth Voss, deceased. You have been named as a beneficiary in her will. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of your inheritance. An appointment has been tentatively scheduled for August 23rd at 2 o'clock. Please confirm your attendance. I had to read it 3 times before the words connected to meaning. Pearl Elizabeth Voss. Marion Voss, the gallery owner. I called her immediately, my hands fumbling with the phone. Marion, it's Vanessa Palmer. I just got a letter from a law firm saying I'm in your will. Are you okay? Is something wrong? There was a pause, then her distinctive laugh, raspy from years of smoking she'd quit a decade ago. I'm fine, dear. Very much alive. That must be my mother's estate. She passed last spring. I didn't realize she'd included you, but knowing her, it makes perfect sense. Your mother? Marion's voice softened. Pearl was my mother. She used the Voss name professionally, but her full name was Pearl Elizabeth Voss Palmer. She was your grandmother. The room tilted slightly. The compass. The note. The coordinates I'd never looked up because I thought they were symbolic. I'd assumed my father's mother had given it to Rita. But Marion had been at the gallery opening. Marion had sought me out. Marion, who shared my grandmother's first name, but I'd been too caught up in my own story to notice the connection. I don't understand, I said weakly. My grandmother, your mother, why wouldn't she tell me you existed? Marion sighed, a sound that carried decades of complicated family history. Your father and I had a falling out years ago, long before you were born. Something about how the family business should be run, who deserved what share. The usual money and pride nonsense that tears families apart. Mother tried to keep the peace, but eventually she had to choose sides, or at least appear to. Publicly she supported your father. Privately, she made sure I was taken care of. And apparently, she made sure you'd find your way to me when you needed it. The gallery, I said slowly. She planned this. Some of it, yes. Mother told me about you years ago. Showed me photos, shared your work when she could get her hands to it. She said you had real talent being buried under family expectations. When she got sick, she made me promise I'd watch for you. Said you'd eventually break free, and when you did, you'd need someone in your corner who understood what it cost. I sat down on my kitchen floor, phone pressed to my ear, trying to absorb this information. So the compass, the note, that was her way of connecting us. Exactly. And the inheritance, whatever it is, that's her way of making sure you have foundation. She believed in investing in artists, especially ones the family overlooked. The appointment at the law firm revealed that my grandmother had left me a trust fund. Not a fortune by any stretch, but enough to cover 2 years of modest living expenses if I needed it. The lawyer, a precise woman named Catherine Park, explained that the fund had been established specifically to support my artistic career. There were stipulations. I couldn't use it to pay off debt or buy property. It was designated for supplies, studio space, education, anything that directly contributed to my work as an artist. Your grandmother was very specific, Catherine said, sliding documents across her desk. She wanted you to have the freedom to create without the constant pressure of financial survival. She believed that's when real art happens. I left the office in a daze. 2 years. I had 2 years where I could say yes to projects that inspired me instead of just ones that paid. Where I could experiment and fail and learn without the terror of eviction or unpaid bills. The relief was so profound I had to sit in my car for 10 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. That evening, I went to Marion's gallery. It was closed to the public, but she'd told me to come by anyway. She was in the back office, surrounded by catalogs and invoices, reading glasses perched on her nose. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, I said from the doorway. Marion looked up and smiled. She was. Stubborn as hell, played favorites, held grudges like they were precious gems. But she loved fiercely and she saw people clearly. Those two things don't always go together. She gestured for me to sit. I meant what I said at your opening. Your work has weight. But I should have also told you that you have family. Complicated, scattered, sometimes disappointing family, but family nonetheless. And not just blood. The kind you choose and build and maintain because it matters. I thought about Rita, who'd held onto a compass for years. About Claire, who'd vouched for me without hesitation. About Kenneth Bradshaw, who could have quietly handled the situation internally but chose transparency instead. About Marion herself, who'd given me a platform before she revealed our connection. These people weren't bound to me by obligation or shared history. They'd chosen to show up. And I'd chosen to let them. September brought cooler temperatures and the kind of golden light that made Portland feel forgivable after the harsh summer. My second gallery show was scheduled for mid-October, which meant I was in full production mode. The new pieces were different from my previous work. Bolder, more confident, less concerned with being palatable. I was painting birds again, but these were birds in flight, mid-transformation, wings spread against abstract backgrounds that suggested both freedom and turbulence. Marion came by my apartment one afternoon to review the progress. She moved from piece to piece in silence, occasionally tilting her head or stepping closer. Finally she turned to me. "These are angry," she said. "Not bitter, but angry. There's fire here." I nodded. "I'm tired of making pretty things that don't say anything. These are pretty and they have teeth." "Good. Art without teeth is just decoration." The show opened on October 15th during Portland's first Thursday Art Walk, when galleries stayed open late and the streets filled with people moving from space to space. My work was displayed in Marion's main room, 23 pieces ranging from small intimate sketches to large canvases that dominated entire walls. I'd titled the show Flight Path, a deliberate callback to the Cascade campaign but reimagined as something entirely mine. The turnout was bigger than I'd expected. People I knew, people I didn't, industry professionals, curious wanderers. I spotted Rita near the back talking to someone I recognized from the marketing magazine that had published my interview. Kenneth Bradshaw arrived with his wife, a striking woman who spent 20 minutes examining my largest piece, a heron breaking through what looked like a shattered mirror. Halfway through the evening, a commotion near the entrance made people turn. A woman in an expensive coat was arguing with Marion about something, her voice raised just enough to carry. I couldn't hear the specific words, but I recognized the tone. Entitled indignation. The belief that rules didn't apply to her. Marion remained calm, her voice low and firm, until the woman finally left, the door closing sharply behind her. Marion found me afterward, shaking her head. "Your mother tried to come in. I told her this was a private event and she wasn't on the guest list. She claimed she had every right to see her daughter's work. I told her she'd forfeited that right when she chose to support the daughter who stole over the daughter who created." Something in my chest both clenched and released. "Thank you." She squeezed my shoulder. "You get to decide who belongs in your life, Vanessa. Never forget that." By the end of the night, 18 pieces had sold. 18. I stood in the empty gallery at midnight, Marion pouring us both whiskey from a bottle she kept in her office, and tried to process what had happened. Not just the sales, though those were validating and financially significant. But the fact that people had stood in front of my work and seen something worth claiming. Worth living with. Worth the price tag Marion had confidently assigned. October faded into November with a routine that felt both foreign and right. I worked mornings on the book illustrations, afternoons on new pieces for future shows, evenings on the occasional freelance project that interested me. The trust fund from my grandmother meant I could be selective, saying no to work that didn't align with what I wanted to create. It was a privilege I'd never had before and I tried not to take it for granted. The publisher sent the first finished book in mid-November, a physical copy that arrived in a cardboard mailer. I opened it slowly, almost afraid to see my work printed and bound. But there it was. My illustrations across glossy pages, my name on the cover right beneath the author's. I sat on my couch holding it like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. Rita called that evening for our weekly check-in, something that had become habit over the past months. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I looked at the book sitting on my coffee table. Like I've spent my whole life climbing and I just realized I'm already at the summit. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy looking up at where other people told me I should be. "That's probably the wisest thing I've heard all week," she said. "What are you going to do now?" "Keep climbing. But in whatever direction I choose." Thanksgiving arrived and I spent it alone by choice. Not lonely alone, but intentional solitude. I cooked a small meal, nothing fancy, and ate it while reading a novel that had nothing to do with art or family or justice. Later I walked through my neighborhood, watching lit windows and hearing laughter spilling from houses where people had gathered. I didn't feel excluded from those gatherings. I felt exempt from them. There was a difference. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. The conservation campaign had received a major award from a national environmental organization. She wanted me to know and to thank me again for creating something that had become bigger than either of us anticipated. I texted back congratulations and meant it, That work had been redeemed. It existed in the world with my name attached, doing exactly what I'd hoped it would do all those years ago. December brought the kind of cold that made you remember Portland sat closer to Canada than people like to think. I bundled up for walks, worked with space heaters running, and started planning for the new year. The publisher wanted the second book finished by March. Marion had scheduled my third show for next September. And I'd been approached by a design firm about consulting work, helping them develop better practices around crediting and compensating freelancers. They'd read the article about my situation and wanted to make sure they weren't inadvertently creating similar scenarios. On the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, I drove out to the coast. The same beach I'd visited the previous Christmas, cold and gray and unforgiving. I walked until my feet hurt and my face went numb, thinking about everything that had changed in 12 months. Last year I'd been newly vindicated but still processing. Still angry in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Still waiting to see if the consequences would stick or if somehow my family would find a way to rewrite the narrative again. But they hadn't. Diane was still in Seattle rebuilding a life disconnected from the industry that had celebrated her. My parents were still in Portland, still hosting dinners I wasn't invited to, still presumably wondering how things had gotten so broken without examining their own role in the breaking. And I was here, standing at the edge of the ocean, finally understanding that their story and mine had diverged completely. We were no longer chapters in the same book. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been putting off for months. I wrote an email to my parents. Not long, not accusatory, just clear. I want you to know that I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I've built a career and a life that make me proud. I've found people who see me and support me without needing me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship that feels honest or equal. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. But I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not hoping you'll suddenly recognize what you couldn't see before. I'm just moving forward. And I wanted you to know that I'm happy. Despite everything, or maybe because of it, I'm genuinely happy. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I turned my phone off and walked back to my car. The sun was setting early, turning the sky colors that seemed impossible for winter. Pink and orange and deep purple all bleeding into each other like watercolors on wet paper. I stood watching until the last light disappeared, then drove home through the dark. My apartment was warm when I got back, the space heater having done its job. I made tea and settled at my desk with my sketchbook, the bronze compass sitting beside me like it always did now. I had drawings to finish for the second book, a fox kit learning to hunt. But first I wanted to sketch something just for myself. No client, no deadline, no purpose beyond the act of creating. I drew a bird. Not a heron this time, but a small sparrow, ordinary and easily overlooked. But I gave it remarkable wings, detailed and powerful, capable of carrying it anywhere it chose to go. And in the background, barely visible, I sketched the shadow of a cage with the door hanging open. The bird was mid-flight, already clear of the bars, not looking back. It took me an hour to finish. When I was done, I sat back and really looked at it and recognized myself in those pencil strokes. Not the bird I'd been, small and trapped and convinced the cage was safety. But the bird I'd become. The one who'd realized the door had been open all along, waiting for her to be brave enough to fly. The new year arrived with unexpected snow, rare for Portland but transformative when it came. The city slowed to a crawl, unprepared for even a few inches of accumulation. I watched from my window as people attempted to navigate the slick streets, cars sliding gently into curbs, pedestrians shuffling with exaggerated care. School closures were announced. Businesses shuttered early. The whole city seemed to exhale and accept that sometimes nature demanded a pause. I used the forced stillness to work. The second book was nearly complete, just final touches on a few illustrations that weren't quite capturing what I wanted. The fox kit learning to hunt needed more vulnerability in its expression, less determination and more uncertainty. I sketched versions after version, my fingers cramping from the repetition, until finally I found it. That moment of hesitation before courage, when you're not sure you can do the thing but you're going to try anyway. By mid-January the snow had melted into gray slush and the city resumed its usual rhythm. I delivered the completed manuscript to the publisher and felt the particular emptiness that comes after finishing a major project. Not sad exactly, but unmoored. Like I'd been rowing toward a destination and suddenly reached shore without a new heading planned. Marion called during this in-between time. She'd been approached by a gallery in Seattle about a collaborative show featuring Pacific Northwest artists. They wanted to include my work alongside several established names I recognized and admired. The opening was scheduled for May, which gave me 4 months to create new pieces specifically for the show. It's a significant opportunity, Marion said. These are artists with serious reputations. Being included puts you in a different category professionally. I accepted before the old instinct to doubt myself could surface. That voice that used to whisper I wasn't ready, wasn't good enough, wasn't really an artist, just someone who made things. I'd worked hard to quiet that voice and I wasn't giving it space to grow loud again. February brought rain that felt personal, the kind that found every gap in your rain jacket and soaked through to skin. I worked through it, setting up a more formal studio space in what had been my bedroom. I moved my bed into the living area and claimed the larger room for my art. Proper lighting, organized supplies, a work table that didn't double as my dining surface. It felt like a declaration. This wasn't a hobby I squeezed into available space. This was my career and it deserved room to breathe. The pieces for the Seattle show came together slowly. I was exploring a new technique, layering watercolor with ink in ways that created depth and texture I hadn't achieved before. The subject matter remained birds, but I was expanding beyond literal representation into something more abstract. Flight patterns as metaphors for choice. Migration as a meditation on belonging. Nesting as an examination of what we build and what we inherit. One afternoon while working on a particularly complex piece, my phone rang. Unknown number, which I usually ignored, but something made me answer. "Is this Vanessa Palmer?" A young woman's voice asked. "Yes. My name is Sophie Chen. I'm a graduate student at Portland State studying intellectual property in creative industries. I read the article about your situation with your sister and I was hoping I could interview you for my thesis. I'm researching how artists protect their work and what happens when that protection fails." We met the following week at a coffee shop near campus. Sophie was earnest and thorough, armed with questions that had clearly been carefully researched. She asked about the timeline, the evidence, the emotional toll, the professional aftermath. But she also asked something no one else had. "Do you think the system worked?" She said, pen poised over her notebook. "You got justice in the end, but it required significant personal resources and a measure of luck. What about artists who don't have access to good lawyers or supportive industry connections? What happens to them?" I considered the question carefully. The system didn't work. People within the system chose to work. Kenneth Bradshaw could have buried my complaint to protect his company's reputation. Rita could have processed my case as just another HR problem. Marion could have shown my work without revealing our family connection. They made choices that prioritize truth over convenience. That's not a system. That's individuals deciding to do the right thing despite the system. Sophie wrote quickly, nodding. "So what would a better system look like?" Mandatory registration of creative work with timestamps. Industry standards for crediting that have actual teeth. Whistleblower protections for people who report theft. Education about intellectual property starting in art school. And probably most important, shifting the culture so that taking credit for someone else's work carries real social consequences, not just legal ones. She published her thesis in April and sent me a copy. An entire chapter was devoted to my case, using it as an example of both individual triumph and systemic failure. She'd interviewed other artists, lawyers, industry professionals, building an argument for comprehensive reform. It was thorough and passionate and made me hope that maybe something good would come from what I'd endured. Not just for me, but for the next person who found their work stolen and their voice erased. The Seattle show opened on a Friday evening in early May. The gallery was in Capitol Hill, a renovated warehouse with exposed brick and soaring ceilings. My work hung alongside pieces from artists whose careers I'd followed for years. Walking through the space before the opening, seeing my name on the wall beside theirs, felt surreal in a way I couldn't quite articulate. The crowd that night was different from Portland openings. More formal, more serious, people who collected art as investment rather than decoration. I overheard conversations about technique and market trends and which artists were gaining momentum. It should have made me nervous, but instead it energized me. These people understood that art was labor, was craft, was something worthy of professional consideration. A woman approached me midway through the evening, older, with silver jewelry and intelligent eyes. "Your migration series," she said, gesturing to the 3 large pieces I'd grouped together. "They remind me of Agnes Martin but with more narrative urgency. I'm curious about your process." We talked for 20 minutes about layering techniques and color theory and the challenge of depicting movement in a static medium. She bought all 3 pieces and commissioned a 4th for her home in Vancouver. As she walked away to finalize paperwork with the gallery owner, Marion appeared at my elbow. "Do you know who that was?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "Catherine Millbrook. She's one of the most respected collectors in the Northwest. Having your work in her collection means other collectors will take notice. This is how careers accelerate." I watched Catherine across the room, talking with animation to someone I didn't recognize. A year ago I'd been sitting in Kenneth Bradshaw's office laying out evidence of theft, unsure if anyone would believe me or care. Now I was standing in a Seattle gallery watching a respected collector buy my work. The distance between those 2 moments felt impossible to measure. June brought the kind of perfect weather that made everyone in Portland forget the 9 months of rain. I spent more time outdoors, sketching in parks and coffee shop patios, soaking in sunlight like it was a limited resource. The 3rd book in the series was underway and I was finding the work came easier now. Less second-guessing, more trust in my instincts. Rita invited me to speak on a panel about navigating workplace ethics in creative industries. It was part of a professional development conference for young marketers and designers. I almost said no, uncomfortable with the idea of being held up as an example or worse, a cautionary tale. But Rita convinced me. "Your story matters," she said. "Not because it's dramatic, but because it's instructive. You showed people that there's a path forward when the systems fail. That matters to someone just starting out who's going to face similar challenges." The panel was in late June at a hotel conference room downtown. 3 other speakers shared their own experiences with credit disputes, contract violations, and professional betrayal. When it was my turn, I talked less about what happened and more about what I'd learned. About documentation, about knowing your worth, about the importance of finding allies who would amplify your voice when you needed it most. During the question period, a young woman raised her hand. "How did you stop being angry?" she asked. "Or did you?" I thought about it. I'm not angry anymore, but I was for a long time. And that anger was useful. It pushed me to take action instead of accepting what happened. But eventually I realized that staying angry meant I was still letting my sister define my emotional state. Moving past anger didn't mean forgetting or forgiving. It just meant reclaiming my energy for things that actually served me. After the panel, several people approached to share their own stories or ask for advice. I exchanged contact information with a few, promising to connect them with resources. Walking back to my car, I felt something shift. For so long I'd seen myself as the victim in my story, the one things happened to. But standing in front of that room, sharing what I'd learned, I'd been something else. A resource. A guide. Someone whose experience could light the path for others. July brought a commission that surprised me. A children's hospital in Eugene wanted murals for their new wing. They'd seen my book illustrations and thought my style would work well for the project. The pay was substantial and the timeline was flexible. But more than that, it was work that felt meaningful. Creating something that might bring comfort or distraction to sick children and worried parents. I drove down to Eugene to meet with the hospital administration and tour the space. Long hallways that currently held nothing but primer white walls. They wanted color, whimsy, hope. I proposed a series of connected murals telling a story about a small bird's journey through different landscapes. Forest, mountain, desert, ocean. Each environment teaching the bird something new about resilience. The hospital board approved the concept immediately. I spent August working on detailed sketches and color studies, planning how the murals would flow from one section to another. The actual painting wouldn't start until September when the construction was complete, but the preparation was intricate and consuming. In the middle of this work, I received an email from my father. The first direct communication since my Christmas message. It was brief, almost formal. Vanessa, your mother and I saw the article about the hospital project. We're proud of what you've accomplished. We understand if you don't want a relationship with us, but we wanted you to know we've been following your career. You're doing remarkable things. Dad. I read it several times, searching for hidden meanings or passive-aggressive subtext. But it seemed sincere, or as sincere as my father knew how to be. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let it sit, checking periodically to see if my feelings about it changed. They didn't particularly. I felt neither warmed nor wounded by his words. They just existed, an acknowledgement that arrived years too late to change anything fundamental. Eventually I wrote back. Thank you for reaching out. I'm glad you're aware of what I'm doing. I'm proud of it too. I kept it short, neither inviting further contact nor closing the door entirely. Some bridges weren't meant to be burned or rebuilt. Sometimes they just stood there, passable but unused, a reminder of what once connected two places that had grown apart. September arrived with the particular quality of light that only came as summer faded. Everything looked softer, more forgiving. I began work on the hospital murals, spending long days in Eugene with scaffolding and paintbrushes and a growing sense of purpose. The physical labor was different from my usual work. Larger scale, more public, less room for revision. But I loved it. Loved watching the empty walls transform into story. Loved the hospital staff stopping by to watch progress and share their excitement. By mid-October the murals were complete. The hospital held a small dedication ceremony attended by donors and staff and local press. I stood in front of my work, paint still under my fingernails despite scrubbing, and talked about why I'd chosen this particular story. About the bird learning that home wasn't a single place but rather a series of moments where you felt safe enough to rest. About resilience not meaning you never struggled, just that you kept flying. After the ceremony, a nurse approached me with tears in her eyes. My daughter was treated here 2 years ago, she said. She spent 3 months in these halls. If she'd had something beautiful to look at, something hopeful, it would have mattered. Thank you for giving that to the kids who come after her. I drove back to Portland that evening as the sun set, my car filled with empty paint containers and tarps. I was exhausted, every muscle sore, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Useful. Not just as an artist, but as a person whose work contributed something beyond aesthetics. The murals would outlast me. Children I'd never meet would find comfort or distraction in them. That felt significant in ways gallery shows and book deals didn't quite touch. November brought the anniversary of everything. A year since the certified letter from the law firm. A year since learning about Marion's connection to my grandmother. A year since the first gallery show that had started accelerating my career in directions I couldn't have anticipated. I spent the anniversary quietly, reviewing old sketchbooks and journals, tracing the trajectory from where I'd been to where I'd arrived. The contrast was stark. Last year I'd been emerging from crisis, still testing whether the ground beneath me was solid. This year I stood on foundation I'd built myself. Work I was proud of. Connections that nourished rather than depleted. A life that reflected my choices rather than other people's expectations. Rita called that evening to check in. 1 year, she said. How does it feel? Like I'd been holding my breath and finally remembered I could exhale. Good. She paused. Your grandmother would be proud, you know. Not just of your work, but of how you handled all of this. With integrity intact. After we hung up, I walked to my studio space and looked at my current work in progress. A large canvas exploring the concept of molting, birds shedding old feathers to make room for new growth. The piece was still rough, more idea than execution, but I could see where it was headed. That's what the past year had been. Molting. Shedding old versions of myself that had been shaped by other people's limitations. Making room for something truer to grow. December came with frost and early darkness. I spent the holidays working on new pieces for a spring show Marion had scheduled. No family dinners, no obligatory gatherings, just quiet days in my studio with music playing and heat running. On Christmas Eve, I delivered small gifts to the people who'd mattered. A book for Rita. A framed sketch for Marion. A donation to Claire's nonprofit in Kenneth's name. The morning of Christmas, snow began falling again. I made coffee and sat by my window watching it accumulate, thinking about the previous year's solo walk on the beach. I'd been so focused on survival then, on proving I could stand after being knocked down. This year I wasn't thinking about standing. I was thinking about where I wanted to walk next. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie, the graduate student. Her thesis had been accepted for publication in a law journal. The chapter about my case would reach lawyers and academics and hopefully influence how intellectual property cases were handled in creative industries. Change happening slowly but happening nonetheless. I spent the afternoon painting, losing track of time until the light faded and I had to turn on lamps. The canvas was coming together, the molting bird emerging from layers of paint with new feathers bright against the old. When I finally stepped back to assess the work, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just about birds anymore. It was about transformation. About the courage required to let go of what you've been to become what you're meant to be. As the year drew to close, I sat down to write in a journal I'd been keeping sporadically. Not every day, just when something felt worth recording. I wrote about the murals and the shows and the books. But mostly I wrote about the quieter victories. Learning to say no to projects that didn't serve me. Trusting my instincts when they contradicted conventional wisdom. Building a life where my worth wasn't determined by other people's recognition. The final entry of the year was simple. Today someone asked me what I do. I said I'm an artist. Not I'm trying to be an artist or I do some art on the side. Just I'm an artist. And I believed it when I said it. That's everything. New Year's Eve arrived with clear skies and freezing temperatures. I stayed home, no interest in crowds or forced celebration. At midnight, I opened my window despite the cold and listened to distant fireworks. Neighbors cheering. The city marking transition from one year to the next. I thought about resolutions but couldn't think of anything I wanted to change. For the first time in memory, I was content with exactly where I was and exactly who I'd become. January brought new commissions and new challenges. A brand redesign for an environmental organization. Illustrations for a poetry collection. A request to teach a workshop on protecting creative work. My calendar filled with projects I'd chosen rather than accepted out of necessity. The trust fund from my grandmother still provided safety net, but increasingly I didn't need it. My work sustained itself. On a gray afternoon in late January, I received one final message from Diane. No preamble, no excuses, just a simple statement. I saw your hospital murals. They were in the news up here. They're beautiful, Vanessa. They're the kind of beautiful that helps people. I don't know if I ever created anything like that. Maybe that's the real difference between us. You make things that matter and I made things that impressed. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know. I read it twice, then closed the message. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe we'd find a way to exist in the same family without one of us disappearing. But today wasn't about reconciliation. Today was about continuing forward on the path I'd chosen. The path where my work spoke for itself, where my value wasn't up for debate, where I'd finally learned the difference between being seen and being truly visible. I returned to my studio and picked up my brushes. There was work to do. Stories to tell. Images to create that might help someone the way art had helped me. Not art that proved anything or competed with anyone. Just honest work made with steady hands by someone who'd learned she was enough exactly as she was. The compass my grandmother left me sat on my desk, coordinates still unentered into any map. I'd looked them up eventually and found they pointed to nowhere significant. Just a random spot in the ocean between here and elsewhere. I understood now that was the point. The coordinates weren't a destination. They were a reminder that sometimes you had to venture into unmarked territory to find out what you were capable of discovering. Outside my window, Portland carried on with its ordinary rhythms. People rushing to work, buses running their routes, the city being itself without apology. I was part of that now. Not separate or other or overlooked. Just present, doing my work, taking up the space I'd earned. And for the first time in my entire life, that space felt exactly the right size. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.